I'd like to call this meeting of the Kenmore Planning Commission to order. It's Tuesday, March 18th at 7 p.m. Clerk, would you please take the roll?
Sorry. Commissioner Vanderland.
Here.
Commissioner Dorian.
Here.
Commissioner Macias, sorry.
Macias.
Here. Sorry. Vice Chair Thompson. Chair Banashinsky.
Here.
And Commissioner Lasalle.
Here.
And I have Commissioner Olson. He's coming. Commissioner Olson.
Here.
All right.
So the next item on our agenda is our land acknowledgement.
We acknowledge that the city of Kenmore is situated upon the ancestral lands of the Snohomish, Snoqualmie, Siouxsie, Tualash, Stillaguamish, Tualash, Squamish, Mickleshoot, and other tribes who are part of the Coast Salish peoples. We recognize and express our deepest respect for their enduring stewardship and profound relationship with this land, which they have cherished and protected since time immemorial. We honor the First Peoples, acknowledge their vibrant cultures, and commit ourselves to learning from their wisdom in our journey to promote justice, equity, and mutual understanding. We pledge to stand alongside these communities in acknowledging past injustices and working toward a future that respects and celebrates the diverse heritage of this land.
Now, if you'll please join me in rising for the flag salute.
Flag of the United States of America, public for which it stands.
Now we are to public comment. Do we have anyone signed up for public comment?
We have two in-person public comments tonight. The first will be Amir Amahadi, and then followed by Catlin Sullivan. And then we have one online.
Fantastic. We welcome our community members to the Planning Commission meeting. In this forum, the Commission does not engage or dialogue with the public. The primary role is to listen. We will hear from our on-site guests first, followed by our pre-registered virtual guests. All guests must address comments to the Commission. The clerk will acknowledge your request and call your name when it is your turn. Your time will start when we confirm that we can hear you. Please state your name and city of residence for the record and keep your comments to 3 minutes. We will not split your time with others or reset your time except by express approval of the chair. You can submit materials to the clerk in advance. This meeting is being recorded. Thank you for taking the time to share your comments.
Mr. Amahadi, you may take the podium.
Good evening. My name is Amir Amadi. I live in Kenmore. My house is located by cross-section of 181st and 62nd. A few days ago, I noticed some surveyors that were on the road and they were surveying. And I asked them what was that for, and they informed me it's regarding a project for sidewalks on 181st. I went to the city's website and got some information on the project, including the engineer associated with the project, and I reached out and asked for the plans if I could review them. They're at 30%, so they're not completely developed. But I asked if this project is going to impact any parking along 181st, and the engineer didn't know if it would. The project goes between 61st and 63rd, and there are no sidewalks between 62nd and 63rd. But there is a sidewalk on the north side of 181st between 61st and 62nd. Within that block, there are two condominium complexes on one side and a couple of businesses on the other side. Frequently, those residents and the businesses in that area use the parking on the south side of 181st. There are no parking on 62nd or on 61st. There are maybe about 3 stalls on the north side of 181st, but plenty on the south side. The reason I'm here, I just wanted to the Planning Commission to consider that if this project is going to eliminate those parking spaces on the south side of 181st, there won't be any parking for anybody to use, except for those 3 stalls on the north side. And also within that block, we do have a sidewalk on the north side, while we don't have any sidewalk in the next block over. I actually presented I shared the same information with the City Council last night. And I just wanted the commission to consider the impact if that project is going to eliminate the sidewalk, not the sidewalk, excuse me, the parking for the residents, because as I mentioned earlier, there are no spaces available for anybody to park. So I appreciate if that would be considered for this project. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you.
If I may speak to the just comment received.
Yes.
Mr. Muller did speak before the City Council last night. If he could leave his contact information, I will make sure that the city engineer has that information, because this is within a current ongoing project. It's not part of the Planning Commission's work program.
Sir, if you would leave your contact information with the clerk, we can have somebody get in touch with you if that hasn't happened already. I know Mayor Herbig asked for that as well last night, but we'll double up and make doubly sure that somebody gets in touch with you. Thank you.
Next, we have Catlin Sullivan.
Hello, Catlin Sullivan, Kenmore resident. In your packet tonight, you have a memo from Arch Housing. I would encourage you to table that. Oh, wow, I'm sorry, my email just crapped out on me and I'm gonna have to get it back. There we go. I would encourage you to table that discussion until you have time to thoroughly examine their methodology and findings and evaluate the impact that fee in lieu has on the development in other areas. Seattle has had a mandatory housing affordability zone for years. And my questions are, has that suppressed development? How many plans have been canceled or changed in cities that have imposed a fee in lieu? I would also take a close look at the development cost. Arch says that single-family homes are infeasible because there's no profit, but developers are routinely showing you otherwise. Over the last 365 days, 29 single-family new construction homes have been listed for sale or sold in Kenmore. Arch works off a 3,000 square foot estimate for home size, and most of the ones that were built, 27 of the 29 last year were sold that were substantially larger. They also estimate a cost of land of $3.5 million an acre. Currently, there are 4 new construction homes pending on 80th Avenue Northeast. The land they're built on was purchased at a cost of $560,000 per acre, substantially less than the $3.5 million estimated by Arch. Their financial feasibility also leaves out the possibility of an existing single-family home plus 2 ADUs, which, as experience in Seattle has taught many small developers, is a way you can add new housing in a shorter amount of time than most middle housing options without raising the existing home. You also have a memo in front of you from Kimley Horn, and I'd like to draw your attention to 8B in that memo. The current code would require that you short plat an existing R4 or R6 lot to achieve the maximum density allowed by the base zoning currently in place. In their example, if you have a 1 acre R4 lot in a short platted scenario that allows for up to 12 dwelling units, 1 single family home plus 2 middle housing units per each lot. The requirement to short plat the lot in order to achieve maximum density will add time and expense to the project, which will absolutely increase the cost of housing when it's finished and passed on to the buyer or renter. Because the ADUs and DADUs must be allowed to be condoized and sold separately, the only functional difference between requiring a short plat or allowing additional DADUs on a parcel that is a larger R4 or R6 would be the number of condos in the HOA. Finally, I want to say new construction will always be more expensive than existing homes. Buyers are willing to pay a premium for a new home. And I'd encourage you not to get too caught up on whether middle housing and infill equate to affordable housing. This is housing choice. Not everybody can or wants to purchase a $2 million single family home. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now we have Dakota Rash online. Dakota, you may speak.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. I'll lower my hand. Good evening. My name is Dakota Rash. I'm a resident of Lake Forest Park. Thank you for the opportunity to comment tonight. I'm making a follow-up comment from 2 weeks ago around provision 1821.035 H3 of the code amendments that affordable housing units must have substantially the same function as other units being built. I've never made a follow-up comment before, so I hope it's not too pedantic. I appreciate your time hearing me. First, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm sure this is being offered as a good preventative to ensure that the affordable housing unit isn't just like a shack. But I want to push it even further. 2 things in follow-up. First, I want to push back on something I heard in discussion that, put very bluntly, the affordable unit must be lesser in some way to justify the reduced cost. I fundamentally disagree with that concept, but I also don't think we're necessarily there yet. But in this particular situation, I also think that overlooks that the developer is already receiving incentivization to build an affordable unit. They are being allowed to build more units. In the code, that is written as a requirement. You know, thou shalt not build unless you build an affordable, but that is fairly also an incentive. If you build an affordable unit, you get to build more. So I would still advocate that they should have the same functionality, as there doesn't need to be anything different about the affordable unit to justify cost in this situation. Second, and in the alternative, I suppose, I'd refocus again on the noun. Function was really the thing that stuck out to me about this provision because it's such a foundational word. I'd say function goes beyond a deck. I'd say function even goes beyond a heat pump. I have a small deck on my condo. If it was not there, the condo I rent, I would not say that my housing's function has changed. The features may be different. Maybe the opportunities to host folks in a certain way might be different, but not the function. I don't feel that would be affected because it is still providing safe, comfortable shelter. So if there is discomfort with switching substantially the same away to the same, then perhaps consider switching the noun from function to features. And since I'm at 40 minutes, I'll just be very clear. I'm proposing perhaps consider either switching that the function must be substantially the same to the function must be the same, or the features must be substantially the same. That way that there is no difference in function with these units. They are still providing safe, comfortable housing. Thank you for the consideration, and I hope that a follow-up comment didn't seem too pedantic. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more comments? Nope. So that concludes our public comment. Thank you, everybody, for sharing your thoughts with us tonight. We are going to move on to the consent agenda, which includes both
I
the,
move the consent calendar. Right?
so the consent agenda includes both the previous meeting minutes and the commissioner excusals. So I will accept a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I move the consent calendar.
Okay, I'll second it. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the consent agenda stands as approved unanimously. And next we have a staff report.
We do,
Yes.
Chair, but prior to that, I'd like to introduce some guests that we have this evening. I'd like to introduce Brittany Chu, who is sitting at the staff table, who is our new senior planner in community development. Brittany it will be helping us with some code amendments and supporting some of our work on the planning commission. So yesterday was her first day. So she came back for a second day. So that's always good. That's always good. So we are very excited to have Brittany join us. So she came this evening to meet you all, and you might be seeing her at future planning commission meetings. And secondly, Stephanie Lukash has stepped in this evening. Stephanie will be the new interim city manager, so she just wanted to stop in and say hello to you all. And so those are the special guests. And Mike Stanger is here from Arch this evening to talk about affordable housing. So in your packet this evening, you have received revised draft code amendments, which reflect the changes that you made or suggested at your last meeting. And we also have information from Arch, and Arch does have a presentation. So I don't know if you wanted to see the presentation first and talk a little bit about inclusionary housing and some options that were presented in your packet. Currently, inclusionary housing code is not included in the draft. So if you do want to go down that path and have some code or have some provisions, now would be the time to make that decision. So by the end of the evening, after you've had the affordable housing discussion and discussed the revised draft code, if there are any further revisions, then we can make those, and if we're ready then to move forward to a public hearing. And the other thing that we will be presenting this evening, we put together sort of a draft showing different housing types on a standard lot, and Todd will be showing those. I think sometimes a picture paints 1,000 words, so you can actually see what those housing types look like and how they compare to a single family footprint. So again, I think when you're looking at code, keep in mind that we're trying to allow these different housing types for housing choice. And we've put the code together based on your direction of how to flex other certain parts of the code, whether that's impervious surface or height or parking, because something has to give a little bit in order to have those different types in place. So again, the code reflects your current direction, but if there are any additional changes, then we're happy to hear those and have that discussion. So, Chair, if it's okay with you, I'd like to turn the meeting over to Mike for his presentation.
Yes, that sounds great. And just for the listening public and the commissioners, we're going to hear from Arch first so that Mike is free to go if he wants after his presentation. And we'll continue on with the rest of our agenda items. And just as a reminder too to the commission, we are aiming to be able to make a recommendation to move our draft code to a public hearing on April 1st. So keep that in mind, that is our goal for tonight. Thank you for being here, Mike.
Thank you for having me. Again, my name is Mike Stanger, and I'm a senior planner with the Regional Coalition for Housing, also known as ARCH. And the city of Kenmore is a member of ARCH, and that's why I'm able to support staff work and planning commission work tonight, which I'm happy to do. Last time I was here in February, I gave kind of a general overview of the potential of middle housing to produce affordability, and said that we would be doing some financial modeling and would like to return with more specific findings from that modeling if you were interested. And so I'm happy to do that tonight. Wanted to start by recognizing that Kenmore has a policy in your comprehensive plan that says to the effect that whenever the city is increasing density or development potential of land, that the city will consider requiring housing affordability from that property. And the reason for that, supporting that, is that increasing development potential increases the value of the land for the owner, but that public actions that have that effect should also lead to some sort of public benefit. And that is the concept behind the analysis that we do, which is sometimes referred to as land value capture. And it's illustrated in the diagram on your screen there, which represents one of the prototypes that we analyzed. So in this case, for a project of 4 cottage housing units on a 10,000 square foot lot, we estimated that the typical costs would be, including a minimum profit and development fee, developer's fee, would be a little over $3.3 million. and that the net proceeds after, after sales expenses and such would be over $3.4 million. So it would return more than required for this to be a feasible project. From that residual profit, or excess profit as sometimes called, is a potential for the city to assess some affordable housing. And because it's a 4-unit project, if we were operating under the state HB 1110 guideline that had requested or that had suggested requiring 1 full affordable unit out of the 4, that would not be a feasible outcome. But what we're proposing is that you consider a requirement of 10% of the units, which of 4 units, of course, is only 0.4 of a unit, and could be converted into a fee in lieu of that affordable housing. Based on the difference between the market price of that unit and an affordable price, estimate that to be worth $38,400, much less than the residual profits, which means that this prototype still comes out to be feasible. So this is one example of several that we ran as scenarios based on what we thought would be typical, expected kinds of projects on middle-sized lots of what might be expected to redevelop. We didn't try to measure or model every single possibility, but we thought we could capture what would be a common occurrence, or even perhaps most of the situations. We also checked our numbers against recent sales. But given the comments earlier, I want to mention again that, we're always open to more input, and would be happy to consider more recent information if that's becomes available to us. But let me move on here if I can. So I mentioned that we did a number of scenarios, and some of them were not feasible even without affordable housing requirement. And those were the ones that were just 1 or 2 or sometimes even 3 units, if they didn't try to really grow the total floor area of the project. If you could get the floor area above basically half of the lot size, so if you're familiar with a floor area ratio, something that would be more like 0.6 or greater, then those projects become feasible in our model and have, excuse me, have residual profits that also support housing affordability. Here's the details on the 4 prototypes that we found would be feasible. And this is the same information that's in your packet. If you have any questions about how the math works here, I'd be happy to walk through it. So also in our memo in the packet, we outlined 2 possible options as a way of helping discussion get started here. These aren't the only options, and indeed you could trade out or mix match or drop some of the provisions if you like. But we thought this was a useful starting place. One would be kind of a simple approach that would apply across the R4 and R6 zones within the city, which is if a project provided 4 or more new units, then a 10% set aside of affordable units with affordability at 80% of median if it was owner occupied, or 60% of median if renter occupied. And the rounding, you would not round the units if there were fewer than 10 total units. So that would leave a fraction that somebody could pay that fee in lieu, as I showed earlier. But if there were a bigger project, 10 or more units, then you could go ahead and round that number up or down from 0.5 and then not worry about the fractions or the fee in lieu. Or you could leave the fraction if you wanted, but so that's one approach. Another one would be a little more complicated, but it would also be adapted a little bit more closely to what, to the transit access in ways that is described in the state law. And so, of course, what I mean by near major transit would be within a half mile of major transit stop, and away meaning further than that. So in a tier 2 scenario, as described in HB 1110, I can go back and describe that if we need to, but that would, if you took that approach as your rezoning, then the areas that are further away from major transit would have a right to 2 units per lot. And so this proposal would say that if you wanted to build more than 2 units per lot, then the affordable housing requirement would apply. If your property was close to major transit, then you would have the right to 4 units per lot. In this case, you would have, if you were doing more than 2 units, then you would be required to do that. So in effect, you're further away, then it's more of a voluntary situation. Whereas if you're in the transit area, then you're really, it's mandatory. But the fee in lieu could work the same way as it did in either case. Some other options that you might think about. Some of cities that we work for have included or are considering exemptions for smaller units. And so this is, I think, particularly what they had in mind is that if you're a homeowner and you want to put an ADU in your backyard, or a bigger cottage, perhaps something like that, whether for your own use or to help with your, create a rental unit, that those could be excluded. In Sammamish just adopted their middle housing code, and that they exempt units under 1,000 square feet. I believe your code has, I'm not sure about the proposed new code if it changes this, but the current code has a ADU limit of 1,500 square feet. So that might be another thing to think about. Or you could go higher. Another possibility, and this came up in Redmond, still under consideration, would be if you want to tear down a single family home and build a bigger one, then you would have to pay a fee in lieu. But if you were going to build more than 1 unit, which is what the city hopes to have happen, get more density in smaller units, then they will, again, this is not approved yet, but it's at the Planning Commission, but it would exempt the square footage of the tear down home as a little bit more of an incentive for that. And then the fee would only apply to the new square footage. Another thing that's come up is that a number of investors and smaller builders have said that, well, we've bought parcels hoping to rebuild, and we paid price, under the current code, and that's what our model is built on. And we don't want to, it would be cumbersome or costly for us to have to, and we might not be able to rebuild under the new code, at least not right away. So one thing to consider would be, some kind of a delay where you could not only allow them time to vest under the current code, or and also allow the city time to apply the fee in lieu at a later date. Just I had a couple of other slides that to help do a comparison between just doing what the minimum the state would allow and what we've put on the table here for you to think about, which is actually, when you think about it, some ways a better deal for developers. So for example, in a tier 2 situation, when your property is close to major transit, then you would get a lot density of 4 units, but you would, I mix this up. I did mix up my, sorry about that. Close to major transit, you get 4 units. No, and you wouldn't have to do affordable, right? But we would, but those would only be feasible for, as I said before, if you were doing 3 or 4 units and had more floor area there than half of an FAR. With our option 2, the requirement would be 10% of the new units. And again, those units would still be feasible even with a 10% requirement. But away from major transit, you'd have a lot density of 2 units, and you could only go to 4 units if you agreed to make one affordable. And in our proposals, then it would only be 10%, so it would not be a whole unit, it would just be 0.4 of a unit or whatever 10% was. I don't think I need to. So that was basically a run through of what's in the memo. But if you have any questions, then I'd be happy to try and explain further.
Thank you so much, Mike. Vice Chair Thompson, and then Commissioner Olson.
Thank you for your work. The slides, I just want to make sure I sort of understand this. You have 2 not graphs, but charts, Excel sheets on the there it goes. Now it's working. 2 Excel sheets or graph, whatever, in your attachment 1 in your memo. So what you just explained is the same thing that's in the memo, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I just wanted to make sure there wasn't a change there, and it pretty much is this. That's just the numbers that go behind that, right?
Correct.
Okay, great. I just want to make sure I wasn't confused.
Okay, Commissioner Olson, and then Commissioner Lasalle.
Yeah, first off, I just wanted to say I really liked those exemptions, looking to limit the impact and ensure that we have more affordable housing stock for the very low end for things like ADUs and cottage housing. I think that's I'm in support of that, and I think that would be something, if we have a fee in lieu, we should include more for the rest of the commission. And then I just wanted to make sure I understood that last point here, and it might be in the memo, so I'll double check that I didn't miss it here. Are we proposing setting aside 10% of the units if we allowed a development to construct more than 2 units outside of that transit-oriented area, as opposed to an entire new unit, but we would still let them build more potentially? Or am I think I might be misunderstanding something there, so I just wanted to ask about that.
No, it's a great question because it's a confusing set of ideas. And like I said, they can be mixed and matched a little bit, but what second option or proposal says is that if you're away from major transit and you wanted to build more than the 2 units on your lot, on a lot, which you would have a right to, then you'd have a requirement for some affordability. But you could do 2 units on the lot without any affordability.
Okay, so just to be clear, it would effectively allow additional units outside of the transit-oriented area, but instead of having to build an entire new or provide an affordable housing unit, they would just pay a fee in lieu in those instances. If it's a development of 4 units or more.
Right.
Okay. So it doesn't necessarily apply to like a single lot development where someone builds 4 units on a single lot. It would generally be the larger developments that would be affected by that.
Well, if
just because that's kind of the baseline for everything else, right? I think that was my understanding.
So in the first option, it would only apply if you had 4 units or more in the project. Second option is more than, it depends on whether you're close to transit or not. If you're away from transit, the idea was that you already have a right to 2 units on a lot. So the requirement would kick in if you, and it's also not feasible, in our modeling, there's no real benefit. That is, it might be feasible for some people, it might not be feasible for others, but there's not, on the whole, there's not a great deal of benefit financially from going from 1 unit to 2 units on a lot. Okay. So our thinking was that if you want to go to more than 2 units on a lot, then you should do some affordability. But in the transit area where you're given the right to 4 units on a lot, then you would have the requirement.
Okay, I may ask some more questions about this later, but I think that helped clarify it a bit. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Lasalle, then Commissioner Vanderlyn, then Commissioner Dorian.
Thank you very much. I had a question just to make sure I understood properly the hypothesis, especially in the first waterfall chart that you provided as an illustration. You had used a fee of 0.4 units. I think Commissioner Olson might have addressed that. Is it tied, that 0.4, is it because it was 10%? Or is there a different rationale?
That comes from the 10%. Yes.
Okay. So thank you, Commissioner Olson. And in that case, quick follow-up. What are your thoughts with regards to the second transit-driven option related to the risk of segmentation or I don't want to use segregation, but of zoning of affordable houses in specific areas of Kenmore?
Is the question about
So sorry, yeah, just to clarify.
to...
No, my question wasn't super clear. Sorry about that. I like the idea of promoting affordable housing in transit-rich areas because people benefiting from public transits and affordable houses oftentimes have a bit of an overlap. With that said, I want to be mindful not to over-index the concentration of affordable housing only in our public transit corridor and want to provide affordable housing options throughout Kenmore and not just specifically around 522. But as you have more experience than I do in this, I would love to hear your thoughts on the risk. I definitely see the benefits, but what could be the risks of concentrating affordable housing around high transit areas?
Well, if the requirement is only 10% of the project, then I don't think that that creates a great risk of concentration that it sounds like you're suggesting.
Awesome, and I appreciate that. And in that case, and last question, I promise, as a follow-up is, if concentrating or if focusing around those high transit areas, will the targets of affordable housing for Kenmore potentially be met despite limiting it to a specific area of Kenmore?
Well, inclusionary zoning by itself is not going to meet the city's targets, and nor is funding. Reaching the targets depends, and I think this is recognized in the Washington Commerce Department's guidance on this, is that the production that meets the targets themselves is hoped to increase supply sufficiently to help also contribute to affordability and by supply starting to meet demand. So there are a number of things that have to happen in order for the city to, in actuality, meet those affordability targets. But what the city is challenged to do by the law is to show that they're making the effort by taking regulatory measures that can be expected to produce affordable housing that meets the city's needs.
Thank you.
So Commissioner Vanderleen, Commissioner Dorian.
Yes, thanks again, Mike. Question for you, or actually maybe this is more for the staff. When we're talking about going from 2 to 4 units, does that does that assume that that development would still have to be constrained within the existing development envelope? Or are we thinking that there would be some relaxing of that, whether that's setbacks, heights, whatever?
Now you're getting into the code.
Yes.
Yes. So we can kind of hold that question until we go through the draft code and you can kind of see what is flexed for these units. But yes, there has been some flexing in terms of impervious surface and height.
Can I add to that? I spoke with the consultant, Kimley Horn, and asked them specifically about what we were modeling. And they answered that they believe that in terms of the square footage related to the lot sizes, that those were buildable within the existing frameworks.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Okay, Commissioner Dorian and Commissioner Macias, and then we'll go back to Vice Chair Thompson.
I think I have 4 quick questions, or related, hopefully quick to answer. My first one, I think is, so which other cities in Arch are doing this already with regard to middle housing? I think you mentioned some Amish already. Are there others that are also doing that?
The only city, specifically to middle housing, the only city that I know of that's actually gotten to the point of adopting their code and their final code amendments for this is Sammamish. Bothell, and including an affordable housing component to it. Bothell, as you may know, adopted HB 1110 compliant code amendments last year, but they're thinking about upzoning them further this year. Redmond, I expect, is very close, and they are doing something similar to what we're proposing here. They actually already had a 10% requirement in all their single-family areas, in fact, across the entire city, which because of the increased density from middle housing, they're increasing that now from 10% to 12.5%. So they did increase their inclusionary requirement. Kirkland is still at the Planning Commission. Bellevue's at the Planning Commission. It's a little bit early to tell how that's going to turn out. I don't believe that Issaquah will include any affordability, and also not sure about Newcastle. I don't think Mercer Island will, or Woodinville.
Thank you. Next of the four, I'll label this as the tariff question. I think we're being proposed from a few cases as to who really pays this, because it's kind of proposed as kind of a tax on developers, but then what we're getting pushback from developers is actually we end up passing this on to the people that buy the properties. In your opinion, who does end up footing the bill, as it were?
Well, we believe in a typical case, again, that this is why we're modeling it this way, is that the value of the upzone in effect pays for the affordability. The increased proceeds that they get from the sale of more housing, to the extent that it exceeds the cost to build that housing, is enough to cover that gap in the sales prices. Not going to apply in every case or to every builder, but we think that in a typical or majority of cases that it does do that.
Got it. And then another related question about the money. So this form of inclusionary zoning, because it's less than a unit, it's not going to directly produce affordable housing on the ground related to that unit, but the money goes somewhere. Does Kenmore keep that money, or does that go into Arch's central fund to fund affordable housing projects? How does that work?
Well, that's open to the city's decision on it. Even if it goes to the Arch Trust Fund, the city has the ultimate authority on where that money gets spent. But if you prefer that that Arch hold it in a separate account or the city hold it in a separate account, that's the city's right to choose that. We've done it both ways.
And last one, which is this one's a bit of a sideways point. So this is one way to look at affordability. Another way in terms of choice that I was thinking of, what really resonated with me was the points around how expensive townhomes and condos are here, and the related point that larger houses cost more. So I'm wondering if an angle of affordability here could be that we seek to incent the development of smaller houses, and then that would it's not going to be 30% affordable, obviously, but does that help us get to a place where we have housing choice that could be more affordable if we go that kind of route? Which I know it's a sideways question because it's not directly related to what we're talking about, but there is the point in there about exempting smaller homes. So I'm kind of turning that around and saying, should we incentivize smaller homes?
I'm sorry, part of it is my hearing.
Oh, no, no problem.
I'm having a little trouble with the sound system here, but if you could rephrase for me.
Yeah, how do I rephrase? So
Are you asking whether the program with an affordability requirement would still encourage housing choice by providing smaller units?
I think that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, I think because we want to ensure that we don't just have developers building as big units as they are, so that on the market we don't have as much choice, because all the market rates stay high because they're building large unit luxury middle housing. It would be good if we can still have choice at market rate, as it were, because it's a smaller house as well. So how these things can work together. Yep.
Well, the way that I would expect this to play out is, and the way we haven't modeled it for bigger projects per se, but on bigger lots, you're already getting a fair amount of townhome and I'll say detached condo kinds of development. That won't change, but I believe that the permission to build more units per lot will, as our modeling shows, that it becomes more profitable when you get more units and more square footage at the same time. So I think that indicates that you would get, that will encourage smaller homes in greater numbers. The market, they'll be relatively affordable in Kenmore compared to what has been built in Kirkland, for example, but how long that will last, I can't say. I guess that's about as far as I can go with my crystal ball.
Oh, thank you.
Commissioner Macias?
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to voice, I like the small unit exemption. I think that would help kind of drive those smaller granny flats, cottages, the small ADUs, those kind of pieces that, those smaller units that we're looking for. And I do think there is some cost that applies to building these things. Anytime we're putting any sort of regulation or cost on it, there is a cost involved. And I do wonder if that disproportionately hurts the smaller builders, the homeowners, the people that are doing it in their backyard. So I like the incentivizing of a smaller sized unit. And I don't know if larger homes cost more. It's, if I bought a 6-pack of donuts for $5, but I broke them up into one and I paid $2 each. I just don't know if that, we're seeing these ADUs at over 1,000 a square foot being sold, and those are more expensive per square foot than some of our own single family homes. So it's like, maybe we do want to focus on these tiny little developments and try to fill in there.
Vice Chair Thompson?
Well, I have a couple viewpoints on this, and I really have a hard time seeing any of this middle housing, except a couple percentage points, being even close to affordable. I mean, 80% of the AMI is still up there, and the costs of mortgages and a lot of other, the costs of the down payment, all of that, it's not a good thing as far as people being able to afford at 50 to 80, under 100% AMI to buy it and pay the mortgage. I think we're going to see a lot of problems there. But I just don't quite get the concept of how those numbers could even get to that point. You know, even on like you've put on your charts there, 2 for 1, someone's going to come out really good, and it's going to be the developer or the landowner, the person that used to live. I mean, that's where this money's going. I like personally the idea of the in lieu of fee, one way or another, whether it's a portion of a percentage or whatever it may be, because my first point, meaning these are not going to be that affordable at all, and that why not go ahead and allow some of those funds to be reinvested in areas and projects that we can legitimately get into affordability at 50% or maybe even less. And that's going to be our difficult hurdle to jump over, is the lower numbers. I personally see that those lower numbers are going to should be and they are going to happen down in the by 522. The concept there is that the low income areas, affordability is supposed to be one, near transit, near services, walkable. We start putting, you know, a group of affordable homes somehow up in the way north end or way south end. That is not what I think some of the concept is, as far as walkability and easy access to services. So I have a real problem looking forward on this to any sense of affordability for middle housing. That's one of my perspectives. Also, I am very strongly of the mind that why should these individuals, particularly the developers, make a profit at the expense of incentives, which could include the, you know, how our environment's going to be hit over this. We just really can't afford to increase our impervious surface percentage. And I don't believe that we can go after our tree canopy. And I did some more reading on, you know, 1110, and there's certain ways which we are allowed to make those preservation tactics from a city. So I want to see a livable Kenmore. I want to see us build where we can the affordable housing and kind of give it a little bit of the ability to do middle housing where it will fit. And I think your Excel sheets really point out the problem with middle housing as far as the money. It's just not there on either end.
Okay. So I have a comment, and then I would like to take the pulse of the commission I'm going to ask you in just a moment after I speak, if you are interested in including some inclusionary zoning code into our code updates. So think about that. So my comment is, we don't have enough housing in our community, and we don't have enough housing in the region to support the people who are living here and not to support the people who will be moving here. The reasons for this are varied, and I'm not convinced that we can market rate build ourselves out of the current housing crisis. We need to build more affordable housing, and inclusionary zoning is one way to do so. The modeling from Arch shows that it's feasible in our community, and I think that's a great thing. I want to acknowledge that we received a letter from the Master Builders Association of King and Snohomish counties cautioning us against inclusionary zoning, especially for smaller developments. And they did provide some statistics to support their argument. Mike, not to put you on the spot, but I'm going to put you on the spot. Would you like to speak at all to the Master Builders letter? Did you see it? It was, oh, I don't know if it was published anywhere or if it just came to commission.
I've seen Master Builders have been sending similar letters to other cities.
Yeah.
So I think I've seen some
Okay.
version of it.
Would you like to say anything in response, or would you like not to?
Well, I think that that I've already addressed most of the points in
Okay.
there.
Great. So it seems to me that there's a healthy element of speculation regarding the results that we would see with inclusionary zoning policy and regulations. Arch modeling shows that it's feasible. Master Builders is saying that it's not, and they're providing some statistics, but I do think at the end of the day that there's a large amount of speculation. We don't exactly know what will happen until we try it. So given that I want Kenmore to be a livable community for everyone, I support establishing inclusionary zoning. I support either option 1 or 2 proposed by Arch. And if after a number of years we aren't seeing the results that we would like, we can revisit our policy and code. So that is my statement. And then I would, Commissioner Olson, do you have a question? Okay. So after Commissioner Olson's question, then I guess I would like to know from the commission if you're ready to make a recommendation about whether we would like to see inclusionary zoning code or not. Commissioner Olson?
Yeah, I suppose my question, and I think we probably discussed this a little bit, but with the numbers used in the modeling that I saw, the price per square foot generally seems a bit higher. And so than some of the numbers of construction I've seen, or sorry, let me back up, than some of the cost per square foot that I've seen for local developments. And I know that can vary a lot, especially depending on the type of construction being done, right? A triplex is generally going to cost a little bit more than an ADU, or I guess a DADU would cost, as you already have some of those construction costs reduced due to you have the lot, you have some walls built already, etc. I just ran like a very, very quick Excel check on this, and it seems to me like without inclusionary zoning of some type, if we were to go, just the market route, if we were optimistic and assumed people would develop things, I'm getting kind of a lower end around 90% AMI, very, very lower end. That's assuming $350 per square foot construction costs and assuming effectively very little profit, if profit at all, on a development along those lines. Would you agree that without some type of inclusionary zoning, to get an 80% or a 60% unit for missing middle housing or a single family house development is basically just not feasible without other types of incentives or supports? I guess my point is I don't see a way that the market can do that. And so this is somewhat in support of these programs. But I'm also sympathetic to the tariff argument, right? We're effectively taxing new residents in order to pay for this housing and driving up new homeowner fees, or costs, I should say. I think I rambled there a little bit. Effectively, my question is, without some type of program like this, would the only types of units available to people making 90% AMI or less for new construction and new units being created be in subsidized housing?
That's a question for me. Based on the sales that I looked at over the last year, I don't believe you'll see many, if any, middle housing types of units sold at a price affordable to a family at 90% of median income.
Yes, yep. Okay, nope, that answers my question. And like I said, those were very rosy numbers, being very optimistic and not very conservative, progressive, I guess you could say in that sense, or liberal with the numbers there. So that 90% was a very lower bound and one that still implies that at the optimistically best case scenario, that's still not affordable to anybody making 90% or under for these types of housing. So that's it. Thank you.
Okay. Do commissioners feel like you are ready to give me a thumbs up or thumbs down about whether you'd like to see some inclusionary zoning code as recommended by Arch or something different? Just kind of in general. Are you a total yay or nay, or you're willing to consider something? So you're yay?
I'll jump into the fire and say that at this point, I don't think I have enough information to be able to say a positive thumbs up or thumbs down. I just don't have enough information. That comes out of a feeling of skepticism about what you're really going to get through inclusionary zoning or subsidizing affordable housing. I'm not convinced that that's going to be a substantial. I do think that there is gain here to be had for a smart developer. And they could come in and they could look at a project and determine whether or not it was feasible for them to build additional units. And that would create value for the developer and could create value that could be taxed by the city to affordable housing. What I'm skeptical about here is, given the fact that the middle housing choices that we're looking at right now, none of them are going to be 10%. None, very few of them will be 6%. 4 units may be something we'll see quite a bit of, but you're not going to get affordable units out of that. You could reap in lieu of fee that then could be used to create affordable housing elsewhere in the city.
Yes, I think
So-
that's what the both options proposed by Arch would do.
Not entirely. I mean, I'd want to go through that wording a little bit more detail, and I think that would be a code development question in there too. But I am okay with the idea that to the extent that there's profit beyond what the homeowner is entitled to in terms of the appreciation of the property, the true increase in the value related to the development or adding additional units, I think that's a taxable, not a very efficient tax, but it's one that we could be applied. But I want to make sure that we have that in lieu of option in there, because I think that's how we would actually be able, over time, to actually create out of missing middle in terms of new affordable. Size isn't there. The numbers just don't work, and I think that's what Arch's numbers tell us. And we're also looking at this, and you look at this, there's a relatively small percentage of the potential development options that are truly going to be feasible. That adds a complexity to this. But again, I'm willing to say, okay, a smart developer will come in and make those decisions about what it is. The city needs to do is to decide whether or not they want to tax that gain, develop an affordable housing fund option. I think that option also does not necessarily depress developers' incentive to build here. They're going to go on, they're going to make a choice. They're going to say, do I want to go to market? Or is it feasible for me to accept additional units in lieu of fee? I think those are all rational decisions that you could expect. You gain in terms of the affordable housing, but you don't lose in terms of having this be a requirement in some way out there.
Could you address how the options that you gave us for inclusionary zoning would work? Because I read them as essentially providing a fee in lieu for developments of a certain size and not actually providing an affordable unit on that property. Can you clarify that for us?
If a project had fewer than 10 units, then the way we've drawn the proposals is that the 10% would result in a fraction that builder could pay a fee in lieu of. If they wanted to round it up to a full unit and provide the unit on site, say if they were building 8 units and they wanted to make one affordable, they would have that option. But if they thought that was more cost effective for them, or they could pay the fee in lieu. If it was bigger than, if the project was more than 10 units total, then the way we've drawn it up is that the fractions would be rounded and that they would provide a unit, an affordable unit on site. And that could happen if somebody was either starting with a large lot or was assembling a number of lots, and or even if if they took 3 standard size lots and made 12 units out of them, then you'd have one on site.
That's okay. So first, Commissioner Dorian, and then Vice Chair Thompson, you can ask your question. Yeah.
I think it's important I ask this, though. It does open up a can of worms. So at the moment, we are looking at code that would say if a developer wants to build 4 units outside of 1/4 mile from transit, one of those units would have to be affordable. So I guess the reason I'm raising that is that your analysis seems to suggest that that would not be feasible. That
Correct.
So that's why I say that opens up a can of worms for me. And that's state law, but not for the tier that we're in. We've just decided that we're going to adopt that, which, if it's not feasible, I think raises some questions. Not about what you're proposing here, but I wanted to kind of just make that point as we're looking at feasibility. Yeah, that was it.
So I think I want to go back to one of the points that I made when I was speaking earlier. It is that it seems to me that there's a healthy element of speculation, that a lot of our questions come back to, well, developers might do this or developers might not do that, and we don't really know. And so I think that for me, it helps to ground myself in what our values as a community are and to kind of set a course that points us in that direction. And if that doesn't help people feel ready to make a decision, then my next question would be, what information do you feel like you're missing? And what information do you feel like you need? So Vice Chair Thompson, do you still want to ask your question about the lot size? Okay, so Vice Chair Thompson and then Commissioner Olson.
So
A lot of people have different views of what a standard lot is. So, but when you say a standard lot, are you talking about 5,200 square feet?
I was speaking generically about, whatever would meet the minimum lot size in any zone,
Okay, that would
whatever
be,
zone you were talking about. And maybe I didn't even need to use the term standard size lot. I think it
well, that's okay as long as we understand what
Yeah.
the term means.
didn't really matter what size the lot was.
D-
You only
Jen's-
get 2 or 4 per lot.
I think what I'm hearing around this is there's questions about both options, there doesn't seem to be sort of a unanimous way to go. So maybe it would be looking at the options and first of all, kind of I think it's a question of, first of all, do you want to apply this requirement anywhere? And then do you want to exempt certain size, so the smaller units? And then the question then is about fee in lieu. So there are choices of what to do, but I think the first question is there interest in pursuing this in terms of requiring it in some form or another is the first question. And if there is more than 4 of you that want to pursue that, then we can perhaps go through the options and determine the number and the where and the exemption, and maybe just taking a look back at both those options. And that might either get us to a decision.
Okay, Commissioner Olson, then Commissioner Lasalle, and then Commissioner Vanderlyn.
Yeah, okay, so this question is from the memo, project size threshold. At the very end of that section, there's a sentence that reads, so basically this threshold is builders specializing in smaller projects, fewer total units, have expressed concerns. So if we exempted those, the last sentence, sorry, it reads, if Kenmore pursues a similar exemption, ARCH staff recommends adding a provision to prevent builders from breaking projects into smaller ones to avoid the requirement. What do those provisions look like? This is one that I was struggling with as I'm considering this, because I like the idea of exempting smaller units. I like the idea of exempting more incremental, smaller developments. But I also have concerns around a bigger development being split into a bunch of little developments and then done in kind of this haphazard, disconnected, disjointed way, when it would be a better, larger project. And that ends up resulting, my concern, I guess, is that ends up resulting in a scenario where you potentially have a less connected neighborhood as a result. So yeah, so big question is just what are those methods of limiting, I guess, gaming that system without having other unintended consequences?
What we've seen happen in Kirkland, where they have a threshold of already in their, oh, I'm so sorry. My dad's in the hospital. I'm trying to cut that off. Kirkland has an inclusionary requirement in their medium and higher density zones, and the threshold there is projects of 4 or more units. And what we've seen happen is a number of times where developers have taken parcels and broken them into, it's short platted them or replatted them in such a way that they can file applications in individual projects of 3 units. So different cities may have different ways of addressing this, but generally to have some kind of provision, I would defer to city staff to come up with their own way of handling this, but some way to address that the inclusionary requirement applies to a project and not necessarily an individual application.
Okay, that makes some sense. And then as kind of a follow-up question, I think this was kind of alluded to in one of the slides around exempting the square footage of an existing single-family house if it was redeveloped into 4 smaller cottage units. But have any cities tried instead setting that baseline, 1,500 square feet per unit, and just putting a fee in lieu on the square footage above that size? So if they're building a 1,600 square foot unit, just having the fee in lieu apply to that last 100 square feet. And then you might have a higher fee in lieu number, but the incentive there is very clearly, you can build additional units, but they need to be this size or under, as opposed to trying to track each individual unit, because then you could just have it go from, 1 unit all the way up to however many units the development would be, and it would be 1-to-1. It wouldn't change. Or have there been any downsides to that you're aware of?
Haven't seen anybody exempt the first 1,500 square feet or something of that nature. Only on a per unit basis. That is units of the smaller size, because that would, because obviously the smaller the unit, the more affordable it gets. And the only other variation on that is the one I mentioned that Redmond is thinking about, where if you built 2 or more units, then you could exempt an amount equivalent to whatever floor area was already on the property.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Lasalle and then Commissioner Vanderlyn.
Thank you. Less a question for me, and I think more just a statement on what my position is so far, as well as a request. Going back to, I think, what we're trying to achieve, we need to solve for more affordable housing in Kenmore to address the affordability issues that is not specific to Kenmore, but is specific to the entire region. So for that reason, I am definitely in favor of inclusionary measures. As for the exclusion of smaller lots, I feel as though the fee and lieu essentially is an exclusion of sorts, because if an affordable housing unit cannot be built because the developer does not wish to do so, or the units are too small to mandate it, then I think that the fee and lieu effectively addresses that. So I don't have an issue with that at all. However, and maybe more of a request, I think, while the fee that we've been discussing so far definitely address the potential funding, I would really be interested in understanding what kind of how can we get to as clear a plan as we can with regards to the use of the funds generated by those fees. Because if those fees are generated and help through a very detailed plan the creation of further affordable housing, I think that would be successful. As we've talked about in the previous discussions and the question that I asked earlier, this is not the end-all solution and should be considered as such, but is a part of the solution. However, if we only plan for the fee generation, but we don't have an equally defined plan on how and when we're going to use those fees, then it will have an impact on just the cost of housing for non-affordable units overall, without necessarily solving that in a way that is satisfactory to me.
Go ahead, Debbie.
It would be nice to have all these issues resolved tonight, but I think the issue of how the funds would be spent would be related to affordable housing. What in particular would be determined? And as Mike said, there is a choice of whether that money is deposited in the city's affordable housing fund, and then the city determines how it's paid, or the city could then choose at some point to transfer that money directly to Arch. Either way, it has to be spent on affordable housing. So there will have to be some fund, whether it's a city fund or the Arch Housing Trust Fund, that money goes to, which goes towards affordable housing. And as you know, Arch provides a broad range of affordable housing types. And when Arch funding is allocated, the city as a member of Arch has to approve where that funding goes. And similarly, if it was in the city's housing fund, it would either have to go to, whether it would be a city sponsored affordable housing project or something, but I think those details are further down the road, which we can address. But I think what we really need to get to tonight is what regulations, if any, you want to include in the land use code. And one of the recommendations that Arch is making, if you did want to have a fee, that there would be a delay in assessing that fee to maybe 2025 at some point, so you could then kind of figure out what that fee would be, and it gives then time for the developers to understand that at some point, a fee would need to be paid when it goes into effect. But for those projects which are currently vested or which would come in ahead of that time, they would not be subject to the fee. So I think that also then takes the wind out of the sails, like, oh my gosh, we're all of a sudden adding more fees. Not necessarily. So people who are already planning to develop could develop. Long answer to a short question, sorry.
No, and thanks, Debbie. I really appreciate that. And I just wanted to clarify that it was not my expectation that how these funds would be used would be solved tonight for sure. And we definitely need to focus on the first part of the question. I was just sharing my hope and request that as we address this comprehensively tonight, but also well beyond tonight, that we put as much care in the conversations we're having now with regards to potential incentives as we do on how those get addressed. But I fully understand that. I was not expecting this to be solved tonight, only that I wish it will be addressed in the grand scheme of things.
Thank you. Commissioner Vanderlyn?
I will try to be as brief as possible. I am in favor of missing middle affordable unit housing bonuses within the R4 and R6 zones. Missing middle, R4, R6, as an option, not as a requirement. I want the developer to be able to think about this on its own, decide whether it wants to risk based upon its feasibility and to come forward to the city. If they did, then they would be eligible for the bonus if they deliver. This is where it gets into the code, back to the code question again. I would be in favor of that, assuming that the development remains within the current R4, R6 zone development zone. We said that we'd allow this choice of developments, and there's all kinds of options about how you can use that development to create different housing options and create different types of increased density. So as long as we stayed within that envelope, and we're not saying that we would now end up lot line to lot line, maximizing the amount of units we can build, which would have, I think, a detrimental effect on our R4 and R6 zone. As long as we had that understanding, I'm in favor of it. And of course, looking at, I think just by the nature of it, would have to be an in lieu of fee. She wouldn't get any additional units.
Okay. Yes, so Debbie, can you please ask us your first question again? You laid it
Excuse
out
me, I
so
think-
nicely.
Sorry. I think the first question was, are we interested in pursuing some sort of inclusionary housing requirement?
So I heard 3 yeses and some at the high level, and I saw 1 nod, and I saw another nod. So okay. So,
So it seems like there's probably 4 of you,
Yes.
maybe there's 3, there's maybe 4 or 5 who are still trying to determine if they're going to fully commit to this.
mhm.
So I think it still warrants going through the options and looking at the options about do you want to have any exemptions, first of all, based on size, and then where do you want to apply it? And that's where those 2 options vary a little bit on where it would apply. So would it be helpful to pull up that one slide? Or are you, so you can kind of see it on your
Yes,
screens?
yes, I
Okay.
think that would be helpful. Thank you. It's a high level yes, and now we are going to the next question.
So
Yes.
so the next question then would be, clerk, excuse me, clerk, would you mind pulling up something on the screen for us? Thank you. So maybe we can look at the two options and kind of move down those bullets, because I think they will kind of look at the, do you want to go this way or do you want to go that way? So the first one I think would be, where do you want to apply it? Across the city or only near major transit stops? Is that right, Mike?
Do you want to treat all R4 and R6 the same, or should there be some differentiation if it's closer or further from transit stops?
This is actually a place where I had a question, Mike. You labeled them simpler and corresponding to transit areas. Was that simply a descriptive label? Okay, so it had nothing to do with the,
No, sorry for any confusion. I called it simpler because it would be the same across the R4 and R6.
okay. We'll take questions. Commissioner Vanderlyn?
Thank you. Question for Mike. This is where my concern about the language came in. I think you're quite close to it, Tracy. My concern here is if we're talking about R4 and R6 zones, this is our missing middle density zoning. When you start talking about applies across the city and projects of 10 or more, then you're outside of R4 and R6. And when you're starting to talk about contiguous to 522, or which would be half mile or quarter mile of the transit areas, you're now into our high density zones.
Yeah, Commissioner, I
That's not the
apologize again
intent.
for the,
That's not the intent.
yeah, I was hoping that the label across the top saying options for R4 and R6 would
So,
make it clear that I was
yeah.
only talking about R4 and R6
Yeah.
throughout the city. Sorry about that.
Thank you. No, that gives me a lot of comfort. But then again, in those zones, you wouldn't have a project of 10 or more.
Well, you could, depending
could
on the
if you
size
had-
of the lot.
Yeah.
If
So
you
that
had a
would
big
not be a
enough, if you
missing
had a
middle
big enough
option.
lot, if you had a big enough lot, like you do now, if you had a large enough, an acre lot, you could build a lot more homes than if you only had a 6,000 square foot lot.
Yes, but our missing middle options only go up to a sixplex.
You could build multiple sixplexes, and that would give you more than 10 units.
Say that again?
If you had enough space, you could build multiple sixplexes, and that would give you more than 10 units.
Yeah, okay.
So with that clarification that we're still only talking about R4 and R6, so option one, it would apply to all R4 and R6 areas. The second option would be near major transit stops. Correct? Yeah.
Right.
So that's kind of like everywhere or concentrated near transit?
And the reason you might want to have that differentiation is because, of course, the closer to the transit stops, they have a right to 4 units. And away from the transit stops, they only have a right to 2 units per lot.
Commissioner Dorian?
Clarifying on this as well, because the example is good. There is a 0.93 acre lot just around the corner from me that is having 5 single-family homes put on it. So my question related to that would be, is this really any project, or is this any project for middle housing? That's the clarification point that I think we need to get. Like, are we saying single-family home projects of 4 or more also now account for this, or are we just saying if you're building more than 1 unit per lot?
You would, in R4 and R6 under the new code, you would only be able to build certain housing types, single family or a middle housing type. and it would apply to any of those.
So
fair?
it would apply. So if I'm a builder and I'm building 10 single-family homes, I don't know where we would find a lot that big anymore, but if I were, then one of those has to be affordable.
If one is affordable, right, there would be no fee.
Vice Chair Thompson.
Well, I kind of look at it, the haves and the have-nots. So, the haves have a ability to buy what they want to buy, whether they want to stretch or whether they just have the wherewithal to get whatever they want. So, and then the second item is they get to choose the neighborhood, and likely the neighborhood, if they just do 2 for 1 or they buy 1 for 1, meaning one house, single house on a single lot, whatever, they're getting what they want and they're going to have to pay the price. With my concern about the impervious surface is that the more we put, jam in the living square footage in these different size lots, we have a greater problem with impervious surface and or other types of issues like trees, surface water, whatever. And when I'm talking about, in this case, affordable housing, I'm thinking of 80% too. I'm not thinking of the lower numbers. And the have-nots, you know, with an inclusionary type of situation, they still have, we're going to invest in projects that are going to result in people getting some housing, probably maybe as low as in the 30s. We could afford to do that. Or we could provide more of what some people have been indicating as a starter home in a regular neighborhood as such. I think those people that can afford to have nice homes, either single or a duplex or whatever in a nice neighborhood, away from 522, I think, you know, everyone needs to pay up their portion with regard to helping those who need a little more help getting started in a home or a place to live that's just better than a standard old apartment. And so I don't have a problem asking those people that make those choices of less affordable housing, let's put it that way. And they will need to pay a little bit toward the folks that need some support. And I think that's a fair way to do it. And it's a way to build our community, because right now we're not addressing the issue of those people below 50% AMI. This is not going to do it, and we need to start to do it somehow, somewhere. So that's my view on that. The other question on the Arch Fund. So let's say you have a million project that Arch is going to provide $1 million for, and we, out of the Kenmore monies, provide 100,000 of that. Do we get 10% credit with the Commerce Department as far as meeting our requirements? That was another question I had.
I don't believe that's been determined yet, but something of that nature is being considered.
Vice Chair Thompson, can I ask just a question of clarification about what you were suggesting with your, the first part of your comment? Were you expressing support for a particular option? For
Inclusionary, yes.
inclusionary zoning? Were you
That everyone
expressing,
needs to pay a little bit.
okay, were you expressing support for an option 1 or 2, or just inclusionary zoning in general?
I'm voting for complete inclusionary,
So more like option 1, that it applies to the whole city?
the whole city.
Okay, thank you.
Now, there could be a, what do you call it? A stair-step approach. I'm open to different ideas along those lines, but yes, it applies to everybody somehow.
Thank you. Debbie, did you want to make a comment before we go to Commissioner Olson?
No, only to say that this middle housing is not going to get you to the levels of affordability at 50% or lower. That's not what this type of housing will do. There is a need to provide housing choice. There is a need to provide housing at all different levels of affordability. But this is not the type of housing that will get you to that really deep level of affordability. But you do need to have more housing choice in general.
Commissioner Olson?
All right, I'll try and keep this fairly brief. These are more just comments and statements around my views on this. I'd say I'm pretty conflicted on this. And going back to a comment from Commissioner Dorian earlier tonight, I see this very, very similar. I see this working in a way very similar to how tariffs work, which is to say it risks increasing total costs overall. That said, throughout history, there have been reasons to apply tariffs. There have been economists that have studied tariffs, and they have talked about how it can be used to protect budding industries, and how potentially without it, you cannot establish an industrial base in a country. And I see this in a similar manner. I see it where tariffs can basically be used typically to discourage a certain thing. And if someone wants to go and import that thing, they can do that, but they have to pay the tariff. They have to pay the cost. And so I see any potential fees we get from this to build, affordable housing as a plus or a benefit. But my concern is that we end up disincentivizing costs overall, or disincentivizing construction of new housing stock overall. And that's the reason why I really like the idea of limiting what's considered based off of unit size, because in my mind, what we're doing is we're disincentivizing larger units, which is something that I've seen many people talk about. They've talked about, hey, I see this massive single family house go up that's 4,500 square feet. Or I see this large duplex go up that's, 2 luxury townhouses that's 2,500 square feet each. I'm not seeing people complain about a townhouse where it's a $600,000 townhouse and it's 1,000 square feet in the townhouse, because we don't see those built really. And I see this as a method of encouraging that through exempting those types of buildings and that type of construction. My concern with it applying to all developments, just otherwise, is it, like a tariff, can disincentivize, and a blanket tariff, as I think a lot of people have recently learned, can have some negative economic consequences and potentially do the opposite of what we want. I also like the benefit of looking to provide affordable housing at all ranges of housing, not just the deeply affordable. While we need to account and consider for the deeply affordable, we do have housing affordability targets and between the 30 and 100% range. And so I see this as a tool that potentially encourages more construction that, you know, may not be 100% AMI or under. It might be 100 to 180% by encouraging more of that type of development, by incentivizing smaller units. And also, if someone wants to build a larger unit, they can do so, and that money could be used to provide a starter home to someone to get their foot in the door, to Commissioner Thompson's point. Yeah, there's a couple quotes I've read from economists that I won't belabor with at this point in time, but I might bring up in the future. So thank you.
Commissioner Dorian?
I think specific to the options, I'm just trying to rationalize the wording of the options with the financial modeling. Because if the financial modeling suggests that the fee in lieu is not feasible for single family homes, then I think we would need to, and in fact, it thinks that only projects with more than 4 units per lot would be feasible. I think that's what we would have to work into the language here, unless you can tell me that I'm misunderstanding that. But I think it would need to be something like all projects creating 4 or more units on at least 1 lot. Just to make, because I thought, like, what I wouldn't want to do is accidentally disincentivize the building of single family homes in Kenmore, or duplexes and triplexes as well. That, because that, as I look at those side by side, that we're saying any project that's creating 4 or more units, then that could include somebody who's building duplexes on 2 lots. But then the financial modeling suggests that that would make them doing that infeasible. And I don't think we want to accidentally disincentivize that. So there's a question in there somewhere, I'm sure. But that what I'm trying to ratify is the wording that it could be all projects, which would include all unit types, and the financial modeling that says actually it wouldn't be feasible for a lot of unit types.
I would respectfully put the question back to the commission. It's really, the question is whether the city wants to use middle housing regulations to encourage middle housing and discourage conventional single-family units, as I think the statute was set up to do, or whether you want to kind of try and keep the playing field even, so that they all have an equal shot.
Okay, I have a comment about us using the language of tariffs to describe what's happening. I understand that there might be some commonalities, but I want to kind of question whether that is a one-to-one analogy, because I do think before it calcifies into us like talking about that as what we are doing. Because as I understand what we are doing, why we are considering this right now is because we are implementing an up zone across our city, which is going to increase the value of the land across the city. So we are adding value by doing this. And the reason we're considering the inclusionary zoning measures right now is because we are considering capturing some of that increased value and investing it back into affordable housing. So in my mind, it is not simply a tax, which a tariff is. It is an attempt to capture some value that we are creating through how we are structuring our land use and choosing to invest it in a certain way. That is how I am looking at it, and I just want to offer that to the commission as an alternative to considering this a tariff. Commissioner Vanderlam.
Thank you for that description. I think it's very accurate. I'd also point out, just as a general comment, that this type of capture of additional land value created through governmental action is nothing new. I mean, this is a business, this is a housing, this is a land use technique that's well proven over generations. So I don't find anything extraordinary in this. What I do want to understand is make sure that we're not creating any conflicts here in terms of, first of all, creating flexibility for developers, because I think to the extent that this is not a requirement, but the developers get to look at this and say, okay, is it feasible for me to accept creation of affordable housing that I'll make enough profit out of this? I think that's not something the city wants to take on in terms of a calculation. I had some concerns about how we put that into in lieu of fee. We'd have to challenge that. That'd be a challenge for us in the future. But I think this is the way to go. So I'm very much in favor of it. I do have those concerns, and I think this is the cart or the horse concern, which may go back into our code development of just what is the allowable developmental envelope. I don't want to see us destabilize our current single-family neighborhoods by allowing outsized developments out of this. If we go from 2 to 4, there's that potential there. So if we have that underlying protection or understanding that there is a limit on the developmental zone, then.
And Debbie, did you say that that was something that we would address in the code section? The form of these housing types? That's your concern, right?
Yeah, I mean, we've
I think it's based
talked
on,
as if there's an assumption that we were going to establish a developmental envelope that was equivalent to the current one, which is the limit on single family. If we're sticking to that, and then I have no problem. If we're sticking to that in terms of adding additional affordable housing units as a bonus, as long as we stay within that envelope, I think we're okay.
I think this really helps keep our neighborhoods too.
Mike, did you want to say something?
Well, I don't mean to preempt or preclude anything you were about to say, but I wanted to offer because I'm hearing a general consensus in favor of some type of inclusionary requirement on associated with this, that staff could bring back next time a recommendation in code form based on option A, and then option 1 rather, and that if you wanted to consider, because it's the simplest one, and if you wanted to make adjustments from there, then you of course could do that.
Vice Chair Thompson, did you have something that you wanted to say before I went to Mike, or are you good? You're good? Yeah, you okay? Okay. All right. Okay, Commissioner Vanderlyn?
The risk of giving us all a sense of whiplash here, trying to get down to the nitty gritty here of trying to move forward to having a public hearing. I like Mike's suggestion. So my question out to other commissioners and to Debbie, if we went to a public hearing and saying, yes, our consensus is that we have to have some sort of affordable housing bonus middle, and we have 1 or 2 options for doing that, that's what we would present at a public hearing and get public input back on that.
That's an open question for them rather than a closed question.
If we're not ready to answer that ourselves, let's
Yeah.
ask the public ones.
okay. I think so when you get to a public hearing, the public hearing is on on the code that you want the public to give comment on. So you have to be clear on what that is. So I don't think you could go in and say, do you want, we're now going to put it to the public to say, do you want A or B? You can change the code after the hearing. If you don't include this at the public hearing, and then you want to add it in after the public hearing, you would then have to hold a second public hearing. So I guess my question would be is, Mike's offer is there enough consensus around option one for him to come back with code at the next meeting that you then want to consider for a public hearing, or amending that's brought forward at the next meeting for a public hearing? That would mean that the public hearing then would likely be pushed then to the April 15th meeting.
I'm seeing enough nods to move forward with that option. Yeah. And then I also heard throughout our conversation earlier that there seems to be consensus for not only option one, but to exempting small developments. Looking for my notes here.
Point of,
Just a minute,
yeah.
Commissioner Dorian, just a minute. So I was hearing support for exempting smaller units based on unit floor area, and also support for delaying an implementation to give developers who had bought property to time to vest. So that's what I heard. And if I was terribly wrong, somebody should jump up and let me know. But Commissioner Dorian?
So I guess, I don't know, point of protocol, I'm making up Robert's rules here, but my point is timing, because this adds a whole other side to middle housing, and to actually more than middle housing, because now we're talking about fees and lieu on single family homes as well. We have to get this all done by when, June 30th?
Yeah.
So
Through this
Well, you have to
council.
get it done before June 30th.
Yeah.
The council has to adopt an ordinance by the end of June 30th, or the state model ordinance will go into effect.
So given that we were going to defer this anyway, or that was one of the recommendations, was deferring or delaying the effective date, what would be the impact of coming back to this after we've got the core middle housing code through council? Because I feel like this adds a whole nother layer.
I think procedurally, you have to do it at the same time. Once you've adopted code and you say, oh, we've adopted this code, but these new codes that we're going to maybe consider next year apply to the code that we already adopted last year. There's probably some legal challenges around that.
Right, affordability requirements need to go hand in hand with increase in development capacity.
Happy public.
Commissioner Vanderlyn?
Yeah, I'm still not sure what we're talking about here. Are we talking about making an affordable housing requirement? Or is this an option that developers would look at the feasibility and make a decision on?
We've proposed making it a requirement, but the question is to the commission.
Yeah,
Commissioner.
I would be opposed to that.
You would be,
Opposed to that.
Okay, is this a point where I can entertain a motion and then we can have a vote? One more question. Commissioner Vanderlyn?
Make sure I understand what required means in this context. What would be the basis if you had, how did that, what are we actually requiring?
Excuse me?
It would,
What will we actually be requiring? Are we requiring a developer who has sufficient land available to them to provide affordable units? What are we, what is the requirement?
on option one would require any project of 4 or more units in R4 or R6 to provide affordable housing equivalent to 10% of the new units at 80%, affordable at 80% of median income.
or more in any part of the city is option one.
Yes, but only applying to R4 and R6 zones.
That's option two. Did I reread?
We're only talking about the whole scope of what we're talking about here is just R4 and R6. But when I wrote throughout or across the city, I meant regardless of whether it was close to transit or not.
Oh, okay, that's what okay, thank you.
Commissioner Vanderlyn?
So this is one of those cases where I think wording has a particular meaning. What I hear us we're saying is that a developer can have permission to build additional units if they agree to provide affordable housing. That because they can't build up to 4 units unless they agree to add affordable housing or in lieu of.
Well, the option 1 refers to as the threshold of 4 units per project, not per lot. So if they had 4 lots and they wanted to build 4 units, it would apply to that project as well.
Commissioner Dorian?
Can I try and work through a scenario to try and help? So this lot that's 0.93 of an acre around the corner from me, they're building 5 single-family homes. Had they been doing that after we put this in place, am I right in thinking that they would be needing to have 50% of one home? They would be paying $6 per square foot on that 50% of the square footage? Is that what we're talking about? Because obviously they've only got 5 homes. They can't make one of them affordable. So we're saying 10% of 5. So I'm doing my math wrong here, aren't I? But you get what I'm getting at. It's a percentage of one of the homes, and it's the square footage of the. You tell me.
The fee would apply to the total square footage of the project.
The total square footage of the project, 10% of that, and then they pay $6 per square foot on that 10% as.
No, sir.
Nope.
It would be $6 because the 10% is factored into the fee amount, the fee rate.
Oh, I see. So I got you. On the total project, they pay $6 per square foot, unless they're making 10 homes, and one of those 10 homes is an affordable home.
That's right.
Okay, I got you. I got you now. Okay. That math coming in. So we're so any project that, so if I'm one of our townhome developers in Kenmore, of which we have a couple, I buy an acre, let's say, because I want to put 10 townhomes on that acre. I decide not to make one of them affordable, so I do still have the ability to do that. But then for the total square footage of that townhome development, I have to pay $6 per square foot on the total square footage of my development.
Correct.
I would entertain a motion to recommend that staff bring back code that represents option 1.
Second.
Oh, I need a motion. Do you want to make the motion?
I would
Commissioner?
like to make a motion.
Okay, we have a motion on the table.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Okay. Any discussion on the motion? Commissioner Dorian?
Just to clarify, I think you clarified, we do want to see the small unit exemption, and there was another thing that you were clarifying, so, yeah.
Does that require an amendment? We want to include, no?
State what the motion
Okay.
is, just,
The motion.
you would restate the motion so we know what.
Clerk, could you state the motion as you've recorded it, please?
A motion was made to recommend to bring back the code that represents the first option.
Okay, so Commissioner Dorian, you're looking for maybe an amendment that would add excluding smaller units based on unit floor area and delaying implementation?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. So we have that motion, are you making that motion for that amendment?
Yeah, I would move that we amend that to say option 1, but with exclusions for projects with small square footage units. Whatever wording staff would like to do for that, obviously, but I think we want to explore that exclusion for projects that are providing units of smaller square footage.
Okay, there's a motion on the table to exclude small units and delay the effective date.
Second.
Got a motion in a second. Okay, let's take a vote on the amendment.
Commissioner Vanderlyn,
No.
Commissioner Dorian,
Yes?
Commissioner Massis,
No.
Commissioner Olson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lasalle,
Yes.
Vice Chair Thompson, and Chair Banashinsky.
Yes.
We have 3 noes and 4 yeses.
Okay, so now we are back to the main motion as amended. Clerk, would you be willing to read the main motion as amended?
I may need some exact wording, but what I have is the commission recommends that staff bring back the code that represents number 1 with exclusions for projects with smaller square footage.
And delayed, should be delayed effective date as well, was in the amendment.
All right, do you want a new vote or do you
Yes,
want,
please take the
you want a
roll.
roll vote or do you want a hand vote?
I think take the roll, please.
Okay. All right, once again, Commissioner Vanderland,
No.
Commissioner Dorian,
Yes.
Commissioner Massis, sorry,
No?
no. Commissioner Olson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lasalle,
Yes.
Vice Chair Thompson,
Yes.
and Chair Banashinsky.
Yes.
So that time we have two noes and 5 yeses. The motion passes.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for getting through that discussion. Do you have what you need from us on the inclusionary zoning piece?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming, Mike. Really appreciate your work with us. I hope that your dad is okay. And can we take just a 5-minute stand-up break, please? Okay, thank you. We'll come back at 9:15. Right, we are back in session. And we are going to move to our next agenda item. Debbie and Todd, would you like to review anything the Kinley Horn memo before we jump into the code?
So I think what Kimberly Horn did was just provide a revised code based on the Planning Commission comments from the last meeting. So I guess the first question would be, did the revised code sufficiently address your comment? Question one. And then the second thing then would be getting into looking at the draft code, and are there any other additional questions, amendments that you would be looking for right now?
Okay, can we start then with the code document and just go through the pages where there were changes?
Pull it up. Ellen, can you pull it up, please? Thanks.
So if you want to point out specific sections of the changes, and I can get to those. If you have questions, I'll scroll through here and see. So just again, this time I got the numbers, both page numbers and line numbers on there, so it should be much, much easier. So red lines are there from previous iterations, and then just the highlighted sections are the ones that were changed from the last discussion. So I just need to kind of get to some of those sections. I think it's further down in the incentives, not the definitions.
I see, is the first highlighting on page 116?
116?
Yeah.
Okay, so I got
Commissioner
a
Macias,
ways to
did you
go.
nod? Is that right?
There we go.
Commissioner
Thank
Dorian?
you.
Yeah, it's not a change, but I mean, so we can come back to it because it's not a change. I really need help understanding the base density table. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Commissioner Dorian, can you say what page you're on?
What page?
I'm on page 113.
113, okay, thank
113.
you. All right.
So specifically, is there something specific on the table that I can
Yeah.
kind of?
It's
Wait.
so when we did this before, and where I've seen it elsewhere in Bothel's code, because the units per lot has increased, it meant that the maximum density had to increase as well. And I think actually the base density is where I've seen that increase before. So like we had R4, so we could have 4 single family homes in R4. But now we're saying there's 2 dwelling units per lot. That in terms of the math, that would mean if we were just looking at this purely mathematically, we would have to double what we've got there. But we've not done that. What seems to have happened instead is there's language that says that single family homes don't count as units. But then that to me seems problematic, because if they don't count as units, then we don't really have anything that lets us regulate single family homes. I think there's some other wording in there now that says that they do count unless there's something else there. But even with that, I'm struggling with it. Like I'm struggling with, because it feels like Kimberly Horn are treating this table as if it's just about middle housing, and it's not. Like it still regulates our single family homes zone. So
was this, just to clarify, was this the question you asked in I think it was
yeah,
in the email? Okay.
via email.
I have a response, and I'm going to do my best to try to reiterate what I received from Nick. And we've during the break, we were discussing on having them come at the next meeting rather than the hearing, so that we could get a lot of the questions kind of flushed out before you guys go to a hearing. So if I, apologize if I can't answer all this clearly. So the response that I received, Commissioner Dorian says, Commerce has been clear that single-family units don't count towards meeting the unit density requirements. However, the code was written to specify that if a developer or, home builder was to, is not building one of the middle housing types, they're not entitled to increase the unit density. For example, you can't put 2 single-family units on a lot. There's a couple snippets from the Commerce Guidebook that help clarify this. And so they referred to page 43 of the Middle Housing Guidebook, which is titled Multiple Detached Single-Family Residences on a Lot. And so what it says is that cities have the option to allow multiple detached single-family residence on a lot, since detached single-family residents are neither defined as middle housing building type nor authorized to count towards unit per lot density. This option is separate from the statute and can't be substituted for the middle housing requirements. So then Nick goes on to say, one approach would be to amend the dwelling unit per acre densities within the code to, as suggested, to have a revised density standard. However, that still won't count single families as a unit for the proposed base unit density. See example below, which now refers to page 78, and I'll go over that in a second, which says for the purpose of base density. And this is a table on page 78 of the Commerce Guidebook, and I think I have this on the screen, Shannon. Let me see if I can bring it up here real quick. Here we go. So that's this table here is what he was referring to in the Commerce Guidebook. So in existing single-family zones, cities will need to adjust density or minimum lot area per unit standards that would preclude the required unit density for the tier on a typical lot, or to establish an exception to allow middle housing to exceed the base maximum density. So this is the response that I received, but like I just said, we can have them come at the next meeting to help further clarify this so that this is understood. But this was his attempt to respond to your question. So yeah, so I basically this is what I read. So I did have it on the laptop here. So here's your question. This is what he commented on. And then I just read these sections here, so.
Yeah, I think it's the maximum density that I struggle with. So like, I think somewhat it's just me struggling with the concept that we're not including single family homes in the table anymore. But then the other side is a bit of math, because if we allow 4 units in the R4 with 1/4 mile from transit, then as soon as I have 4 units in an R4 area, I've only got 2 more left, like which I don't think is the intent. Like I think we want to have more density if that's the case.
So we could put a pin in this one and have them further clarify verbally and, maybe give a little bit more of a description at our next meeting. So yeah, this is what I received thus far. And so I guess we were at page 116, Chair, I think. Yeah.
Yes, any commissioner comments or questions on page 116? Commissioner Macias?
Sorry to ask this. So if we're considering multiple single-family residents not on a lot, right, that can we confirm, is a detached ADU, is it just a detached ADU in name only? If it's sold as a condo, what differentiates that from single-family residence to detached ADU if it has own utilities, their own address? Where does that line happen?
Commissioner Vanderlyn?
I really would like to hear staff answer that question, but I will offer up, I went through the same confusion myself, back and forth. So what is a condo? That's where the definition comes in. If you, as I understand it, and somebody can tell me, if you condoize an ADU, and what you're doing is that you having a separate physical building that is the condo, and the ownership of that building goes to whoever has the ownership of it. However, the lot, the land, and any requirements related to the developing envelope are the same. Don't get a separate development envelope for the ADU, and you don't necessarily own the land. So you have to look to what was this? What was the requirement there? That helped me figure this out. Originally, my thought was the same as yours, was that if you had a attached ADU, separate ownership, include the land and the building, then what's the difference between that and a single family house? I don't see it, other than maybe there's some code requirements here that would kick in. What clicked for me was reading the definition of a condo to say that that would include both the primary original residence and any condoized. So they're all really condoized. One thing. And so all the regulations, which we taxation, all be just like all of the units, and then you have HAO, which then parses out that among the constitutional. That's what I've discovered. So I'll look to Todd and Debbie to tell me where I'm wrong. Back into confusion.
Do you have a response to that, Debbie? No.
I was going to say, I'm going to leave it as a question that we will clarify, because I think we're just going to wrap ourselves in knots. So I'm going to leave that as an outstanding question that needs clarification, along with the one that we're going to address from Commissioner Dorian.
Okay, Vice Chair Thompson?
Okay, well, just to throw it, since you already got my little piece of work on ADUs, we've had several discussions at the commission about what really is an ADU. And then there was what really got me going is that conversation where you can build an ADU, and then the traditional, what we've always thought of an ADU, and all of a sudden now, under missing middle housing, you could split that right up and sell it off as a separate a dwelling. And then you're really making the money because you didn't have to pay for any of the costs of whatever the fees may be, or all the permits, or whatever the deal is. And I felt that it's time for us to go after that a bit. And so I just came up with this little few page. I went and found the ADU deal, and so now I've missed my paperwork. But anyway, to call it now the one that you can sell off and you still have to pay the price is called a variable accessory unit. Well, because ADUs get a lot of benefits if you want to build an ADU. And then the other question is the attached ADU versus the detached, because if you end up having an attached ADU, you could turn that into a duplex. And maybe that's a different situation, not so sure. And then there were, as I was reading through the ADU chapter 1873, I noticed that there were some interesting stuff with regard to, and I read the law, the new law, and it says that you can't require people in an ADU to be related anymore. And so I was doing a little cleanup on that. And then there's the whole deal about parking, required parking in ADUs. And we're not talking about those variable accessory units. We're talking about regular old ADUs. And then there's this, which I was going to ask Debbie about. What is this home industry business? I mean, you have to have 4 parking spots.
Chair,
Or-
if, we're not addressing the home industry section, so we're only addressing, we're not addressing that. So if you have any questions,
about
so
the-
I think where I'm trying to get to tonight is at least, are there any remaining questions on the draft code? And I've got the 2 questions right now. And
Okay.
Chair Thompson, I'm really trying to figure out what is your specific question. Do you have, I know it was something to do with ADUs, but I'm really struggling with figuring out what your question was. If you could help me out.
Oh, with regard to ADUs?
That you, right. Was there a question in there, or was this just a comment? I'm
Well,
sorry,
the
I'm just
original
struggling with
question
that.
is, where do we draw the line between missing middle housing and the ADU concept, which was originally, we all knew from the 5 years ago. And now they say ADUs can count toward missing middle housing, and I read some of that. So that's where I'm confused, is that
Okay.
next step.
So I guess if there was a question in there, the question would be, how do ADUs count towards middle housing unit count? Do I have the right question?
That's a good question, yes. I am
Okay.
thinking about that, and that's true, based on what we've always thought an ADU was.
Right, well, there was 2 state laws that passed, one for middle housing and one for ADUs, and the code then reflects what changed in state law that we need to address for ADUs. So that's one part of it. The part that you're asking, which we will certainly clarify again, is how do ADUs units count towards density in terms of, or not, as a middle housing type?
Great,
Okay, got it.
that's a good question. Do they?
I don't think they do, but again, the way my brain is about to shut off completely here. So all I'm trying to get to tonight is the questions that we need to address and bring back for the next meeting. So I may not have answers for you tonight. I really want to make sure I have the questions that do need to be answered at the next meeting.
Okay, so that is a good thing for us to keep in mind, that we will pose questions and we will understand that we will not necessarily get answers tonight, and that is okay. But we will pose all of our questions. So moving on to page 117, if nobody else has anything on 116. I looked, is that label on that map the correct label for that exhibit? It felt to me like maybe it wasn't based on the text just before it, but my brain is also, Debbie, in a similar place, and so I might need some help. My question is that label right for the exhibit? Is it really applicable middle housing development areas?
I
or-
think this needs to be reworded the more I look
Yes.
at it, because what the intent of this is to say that these are parcels in the R1 that we were, it's part of the alternative
Yes,
conversation, right?
Yes.
So we could
yes.
see on what makes more sense for a title for this.
Great.
Yeah, no, I
Okay.
agree. No, I looked at this again and, yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Any other comments or questions on page 117?
Just,
No. Oh, yes, Commissioner Olson. I can't see you anymore.
oh, did I turn off my, no, it should be on. Weird. Okay. I just wanted to say for the title, if we just add exempt parcels or something along those lines to that title, that'd probably fix that.
What page are we on?
We are on
The
page
one on
117.
Screen, there we go, yeah.
Okay, now I can see you,
Oh, the
Commissioner Olson and
picture,
Commissioner
okay.
LaSalle.
Yeah, yep, that map. Sorry, can
right.
you repeat that, Commissioner Olson? Oh, not exempt,
Yeah, sorry. If we just say applicable middle housing develop or applicable exemptions to middle housing development areas, or something along those lines, but just indicating in some way with that title that the parcels being identified are parcels that are not affected or exempt from middle housing requirements.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Olson. Okay, we'll go to page 118. Vice Chair Thompson.
So I pulled up 1110 and the House bill that went with it, the staff's analysis and summary. And it says that if you have a R1 lot that has critical area in it, that it's exempt from missing middle housing altogether. Did I misunderstand something?
The direction from the Planning Commission was to exempt R1 lots from missing middle housing regulations. So that's the direction that we got from the Planning Commission.
Right, but I was talking about, oh, no, I'm talking about House Bill 1110, that it was, if, I'm just restating that. I know what we did, but
I think, again, we're kind of going back to try and figure out then, are we going to use this alternative compliance? And you said that you would, and that you would want to exempt the R1. So again, what the state law says and the direction you gave us, both are consistent. But right now, your direction was just to exempt the R1 from middle housing regs, and they would apply to 4 and 6.
thank you.
Okay, any other comments on page 118?
Just that I don't know I don't know if there's a display issue, but currently on the screen we can see 117, not 118.
Oh, okay, yes, thank you.
Thank you so much.
There we go.
Okay, hearing none, let's find our next page. Oh, there's something on 119 that is highlighted. Ooh, these are our neighborhood benefits as well. Commissioner Macias?
I just have a clarifying question. When we're talking about building height, is it to roof line or is it to interior height, gutter? Can I just clarify that within our current code?
I don't know if I can quickly pull up the building height, but
I
It just says.
oh, no, I appreciate that. We'll clarify where the building height is measured to per the current code. Got it.
Commissioner Olson?
Okay, I don't want to say something that's incorrect, but my understanding is it's the maximum height to the top of the highest point on the roof to the average lower store elevation, but I'd have to confirm that just to be certain. So it's it's not to the gutter, it's above that. It's my understanding.
We will come back with a definitive answer.
Agreed, yes. Sorry.
Commissioner Dorian?
When would be the right time to get specific on some of these items? Yeah, meaning, I feel like there was opposition to the 45-foot last time around. Do we need to get crisp on that this time around if we would like?
We
Yeah.
were split
Mhm.
evenly. And we didn't have 7 of us, so it was a 3-3. And I think what I asked was for it to come back so that we could discuss it further. Not to be brought back because we had all agreed, but just so that we could consider it again and accept or reject. So that's a great question. Is now a good time to talk more about the neighborhood benefits, even though they are not highlighted? Yeah,
True.
okay.
I mean, yeah, there,
All right.
that was a significant discussion at the last meeting, so.
Yes,
yeah.
it was. Okay, so now is an appropriate time.
How do I frame this then? We had a lot of discussion. I guess I would move that we remove the first development incentive to increase building height to a maximum of 45 feet and 3 stories.
Moved.
And Commissioner Dorian moved, and so Commissioner Macias, you'd like to second? Okay. Clerk, would you like Commissioner Dorian to restate his motion?
Yes, please.
Okay.
The motion is to remove the first line. It's hard because there's a merge on the first bit, but the very first line under development incentive and then the applicable middle housing type, where it says increase building height to 45 feet with a maximum of 3 stories. So that line there, I would say, my motion is to remove that.
It was moved and seconded. Any discussion on the motion?
Could I propose
Commissioner
a
Olson?
amendment? Could we potentially keep the maximum of 3 stories? I believe, is it typically 2 stories? I would have to confirm that, and that might be a question for staff. That's otherwise allowed, but then just reducing that maximum building height and keeping it consistent with other single-family units of 35 feet, but still allowing for an additional story above 2. Like, I guess my thought here is if we already allow 3 stories for other types of housing, I don't think we do. I think it's just 2. But if we were to allow 3 stories with a maximum height of 35 feet for other types of housing, either we can remove this entirely because there is no incentive. But if it's typically 2 stories with a maximum of 35 feet, I don't see the benefit of giving, another 10 feet just for like high ceilings or whatever on a house without actually providing additional living space. So amending, to be clear, amending to just remove increase building height to 45 feet. And instead, it would just say increase maximum number of stories to 3 stories as opposed to 45 feet. And then it would just be within the 35 feet typical building height limit.
Commissioner, Vice Chair Thompson?
I do believe that our folks in the plant and the building department would definitely want a foot limit because some people, well, just think about it. You have high ceilings and 3 stories, you'll be already up to almost 40 some feet. And it does count to the top of the roof because the issue of the height of a building is the views of the other people that are around it at a minimum. And in certain spots, that could be a very painful neighborly discussion. So I'm sorry, Chris.
I think we're in agreement. I was proposing we get rid of that 45 feet and replace it with the 35 feet. I'm just saying allowing for an additional story if it fits within the lot, which will not always be the case.
Is that the motion? I thought it was just get rid of it.
So
The motion is
on
to
the
get rid of
table
it.
Is to completely eliminate that first, the top box in the development incentive column, the first top box, to delete, to remove that. Increase building height to 45 feet with a maximum of 3 stories would be struck. And then, so there's a motion and a second on, there's a motion on the table, and then Commissioner Olson was proposing to amend that to add back in a maximum of 3 stories. And the intention would be that those 3 stories would fit within the 35-foot height limit. So, but there's no second on that amendment. Would anybody, is there a second for the amendment?
I'll second that motion.
Okay, there's a motion and a second.
So in other words, what I just seconded is changing the number 45 to 35.
So yes, so that what the amendment would say is that somebody could go to 3 stories as long as they stayed within the 35-foot height limit. That was what the amendment says. I think I could use a point of clarification on this. Is our current code that the maximum is 2 stories?
Clarify that.
Okay, well, staff is working on that, Commissioner Lasalle.
Thank you. Sorry, double muted. No, I'd be interested in either a clarification or a brief discussion, because I know that in previous meetings, I had expressed the desire to, if possible, encourage building upwards rather than building wider. And both that recommendation and the change from 45 to 35 don't necessarily go against each other, but I just wanted to be mindful and see if there was a belief that one might oppose the other.
I know we do have a motion and motion for an amendment on the table, but I am wondering if we need more information to be able to vote. I wonder if we can, Commissioner Olson?
Are we able to just table this until we can get clarification on that?
I need some help with Robert's rules here.
Same.
No, he would have to move to
To
table.
move
the
to table?
motion.
Okay,
And that's a non-debatable
okay.
motion. If you do move to table it and there's a second.
How does that, sorry, I think I need some help here too. How does that work if I'm proposing an amendment? Does that mean that we would be going back and voting on
The motion.
the motion as it
Withdraw
was?
both
We could withdraw
motions.
Oh,
both.
there's an
Both, you could
amendment.
withdraw both of them.
Okay, but okay, Commissioner Dorian, I would assume, would need to withdraw
Yes,
it.
I think Commissioner Dorian would have to withdraw his or move to table, yes.
And then you would have to ask.
Would you like to withdraw your motion for the amendment, Commissioner Olson?
I will withdraw my motion for the amendment.
Okay.
I agree.
All right. Commissioner Dorian, would you like to withdraw your motion or would you like to let it stand?
depends, point of information, when will be the right time to do line item review if we don't hit it now, I guess, because we're deferring a lot, and I know we're crunched on time. Should we push ahead with this so we get this done, or is there a better time?
Well, with regards to getting clarification, I mean, we can ask the consultant to get all these questions answered, which they'll then be here for the next meeting to get all this ironed out. So I think, you know, if the commission decides to table this now, we'll still be able to get, you know, a clear answer, including the height and this particular motion. And Commissioner Dorian, I think we could address them all in one swoop, so to speak.
Yeah. All right, I would withdraw my motion then.
Okay, any objections? No, okay. So then we're turning these into questions, correct? I want to make sure that we get all the questions recorded that we need. So maybe Debbie or Todd, could you read back what questions that you wrote down with regard to this particular development incentive about increasing building height?
I think the question is whether the commission wants to allow an increase in height above the typical 35-foot height, and then to clarify whether what the code says about the number of stories, because that was Commissioner Olson's comment, is to allow 35-foot height and 3 stories. But I think we need to clarify in the code how that relates to the definition or inclusion of stories when measuring height.
Super. Commissioner Vanderlyn?
Yes, maybe we could also ask the consultant to take a look at the code and compare it to what's on this page right here, because what it's showing is a height of 25 or 27 feet. It's too small for me to read accurately, but it's definitely not 35. What is the current standard? Is it 35 or is it 25? Last comment, a 3-story, 35-foot building.
I already hit my head once on
So I just think we want to.
on the ship.
Understand this a little bit better.
Yes. Any other questions that haven't been captured about this first development intensive about the height before we move on? No. Okay. Any other questions or comments about the neighborhood benefits? I have a question here. And it, so one of the neighborhood benefits that we have here is decreasing impervious surface. And allowing increased height for, in exchange for decreasing impervious surface was one option. And then reducing parking was another. But the second incentive is 1 off-street parking space required per 2 cottage housing units, which still leaves a lot of parking on the table for other middle housing types. Is that something that we can talk about in this table, or do we wait till we get to the parking? I think there may be a whole parking section.
Well, I think in general, the question would be is, as the code is proposed in terms of the number of parking spaces, is that, do you agree with that? Or do you want to make further amendments to, I would imagine it would be reducing parking. And if so, under what circumstances? My computer just died.
Oh, no. Do you have a charger? Oh,
No, it doesn't.
No.
No.
It's like the difference between a sea and a lightning. No, that's the real.
Um,
Commissioner Wilson?
So I just scrolled down to the parking section real fast just to see if there's any items in here that would make sense. And this may also apply to the cottage housing, but basically the incentive as written in the neighborhood benefit portion appears to really only be beneficial when we're past a half-mile walking distance from a major transit stop, or for larger lots. Otherwise, it doesn't necessarily apply. That being said, I think I would propose a motion to strike cottage housing and just have that section read, in the neighborhood benefit category, and just have that section read 1 off-street parking space required per 2 housing units. Or sorry, I guess just strike cottage per 2 housing units. If they meet those decreased impervious area maximums, the intent there effectively being for a larger lot, they don't need as much parking if they're willing to limit the amount of impervious surface area. Regardless, I think it would apply the same in those instances.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Question.
Yes, Vice Chair Thompson?
No, I meant question. I was calling the question, meaning.
So you're seconding the motion?
Oh, I thought we had a second. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'll be quiet.
Okay, so you do not want to second? the
I'll
motion?
second it
You'll
if we,
second, okay.
if you need
Okay.
a second, yeah.
All right, so there's a motion and a second, and now we'll have discussion. Go ahead, Vice Chair, Commissioner Vanderlyn.
Thank you. Could you restate the motion, please?
Yes, I'm moving to strike cottage from 1 off-street parking space required per 2 cottage housing units, such that the development incentive reads 1 off-street parking space required per 2 housing units. And I suppose, I'm sorry, I just noticed this, it might be best to strike cottage from the applicable middle housing type to just say, or I guess not strike cottage, but put in a comma, duplex, triplex as well.
Point of order.
Commissioner Dorian.
I think we need a motion to extend if we're going to.
Yes, we're at 10 o'clock.
I will entertain a motion to extend our meeting.
I would move that we extend by 10 minutes.
Oh,
5 minutes? 1 minute? I don't know. But, what?
10:15.
10:15.
Okay, there's a motion to
okay.
extend till 10:15.
Second.
Second. Show of hands. Okay, it's
No
unanimous.
objection. Oh,
Okay, so there's a motion on the table to strike cottage from the second cell in the development incentive column. So it would read 1 off-street parking space required per 2 housing units. And then associated, well, let's just vote on that motion first, and then we'll deal with the third column if that passes.
Because the parking requirements for cottage housing is different than the others. That's why that's written in there. That's all I meant to say. Yeah, I don't think you can strike cottage from those, and I think that, right?
I was just about to add as well. Sorry. Could I have a
Go ahead,
item of
Commissioner
discussion
Wilson.
or an amendment
Yes.
potentially to
Let's
this?
have discussion on the motion.
I
Yeah,
think
go
it
ahead.
may be better if I rescind this motion and propose a separate motion where we keep the cottage housing parking requirements as it is and have a separate line that says 1 off-street parking space required per housing unit. And then in the applicable housing types, have duplex, triplex, looking at the other types of middle housing. In the parking section, it's different. And so that I still think would be an incentive that would apply in some useful cases.
Okay, what I'm hearing is that there is appetite among some commissioners to consider reduced parking in exchange for, well, it would be decreasing impervious surface to reduce parking. So I'm hearing some appetite to consider that among some commissioners. I'm not sure if it's all. I'm looking around. Commissioner Vanderlyn?
I like the idea of reducing the parking requirement. I think that's a better way to achieve service improvement. But when I read through this first cell here, where you have, not exactly sure, I think this needs to be more redone than what we've stated here. Off-street, we've got free space incentive here, impervious surface to 35, 50, but we don't know actually what for each housing type, what would be the result of reducing 1 or 2 parking spaces. So I'd like to understand that a little bit more. So at least we get a reasonable number over there. The increased building height, I'm not sure how that's relevant in that discussion now. And having cottage housing out there all by itself in the third applicable housing type, that doesn't, so that whole section there I think needs to be rewritten. I would suggest that we be direct about this. If what we're saying is that we would like to incentivize the decrease in impervious surface, and you can do that by, we're going to do that by having a maximum of 1 parking space per unit or whatever we want that to be. I think saying that out loud and direct would be better than what we have here, because I can't really draw the line between what we're trying to achieve and what this language says today.
My sense is that it makes sense to me to talk about increased height as an allowance or an incentive for reducing impervious surface, because then, as Commissioner Lasalle said, we are kind of constraining the footprint of a structure and building up instead of out. So that makes sense to me. But I think with parking, I have a feeling that it might be just a more, like a question that doesn't have to do with an incentive so much as like, what do we value in our community, and what do we want to have in our code in terms of the maximum number of parking spaces per unit, like without regard to whether it's an incentive or not. Do we want to build into our code that there are 2 parking spaces for each middle housing unit, or do we want to build into our code something different? I think that is what makes most sense to me at this late hour. And maybe it makes more sense to talk about this when we actually get to the section on parking, where we see how many parking spaces we are allotting to a unit. I'm seeing some nods. Okay, so we've got a question about the height here. Are there any other questions associated with this particular table? Is there a way that you feel like it could be more clear to you, Commissioner Vanderlyn?
Well, I think you're on the right track, Tracy. I would separate out the height question from the parking question and put them in 2 separate. So we could discuss them separately, because I think they are different thoughts, and the way they're squished together here.
Okay, Commissioner Olson?
I would agree with that, and I rescind my motion at this time. I am frankly leaning towards just proposing a separate motion when we get to the parking section to have a minimum of one off-street parking space required per 2 cottage housing units when there aren't other lower minimums required of potentially no parking units if it's within a walking distance to transit, not making this a thing where we're requiring a decrease in max impervious surface area for that.
Yes, that sounds great. Let us look for the next page then.
Madam Chair, are we close? What do we have to do in order to finish this tonight? Do you know?
We need to get through all of the places where there are highlights.
Okay, we are going to go through all the pages. Okay.
Yes. Okay, the parking table is on page 137. Is that correct, Commissioner Olson? Is that where you were looking?
Yes, that's correct.
Page
137 and 138.
Yeah. Okay, there's no highlighted sections of text, but we're going to stop here and talk about parking for a moment. Commissioner Olson, would you like to make a motion?
Yes, I move that we reduce the parking requirement to 1 parking space per 2 dwelling units for cottage housing and 1 parking per 1 space per dwelling unit as the base minimum for all other types of middle housing. This is not a maximum, just or anything along those lines, just taking the 2 per dwelling unit in regions and allowing that to be 1 per unit.
I will second that motion. Any discussion? Okay, there's no discussion. Let's make this a roll vote. Clerk, will you please take the roll?
Commissioner Vanderlyn,
Yes.
Commissioner Dorian,
I'm sorry, I am not entirely sure what we're voting on. Could we state what?
Yes.
The motion is, and Chris, I only have half of it. Maybe you can finish it. Commissioner Olson made a motion to reduce parking limit to 1 space for 2 units for cottage housing. And that's what and then there was another half of it. And then,
Yes, sorry. I suppose it's a little confusing because I'm not giving precise language here. Effectively, as it stands now, in some instances, we're requiring 2 spaces per dwelling unit for all types of middle housing, depending upon the circumstance. And I'm proposing that instead, our base minimum would be changed to 1 space per dwelling unit for all middle housing types except cottage housing. And then for cottage housing, our base minimum would be 1 unit per 2, sorry, one space per 2 units. And so that's the base minimum. So there are exemptions on top of this within transit that we would not be changing, that would not require any parking. But this is if we're outside of transit, outside of walking distance to transit, allowing fewer parking spaces in those instances without a variance.
All
Do you
right,
have it?
so
Okay.
the motion, do you have the motion?
It's, so the motion would be to have a base minimum of 1 parking space per unit for all middle housing types, except cottage housing, which would be 1 space per 2 units.
That
exactly.
is the motion as I heard it and that I seconded. Is that clear to everyone so that you can vote
Yes.
appropriately? All right, so we can continue with our roll.
Commissioner Vanderlyn, your vote is still yes. Okay.
Oh, yes.
Commissioner Dorian,
No.
Commissioner Machis,
No.
Commissioner Olson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lasalle,
Yes.
Vice Chair Thompson,
Yes.
and Chair Banashinsky.
Yes.
Okay, we have 2 noes and 5 yeses. The motion passes.
Chair, I move that we extend till 10:20.
I will second that. Any no objections? No. Okay, we are going till 10:20. So let's move on to page rolling. So I think that was it. Can you confirm, Todd and Debbie, was that the last?
I believe so. I feel like a
I think-
hamster scrolling.
Okay, I think I see Commissioner Macias, you have a question or a comment? Go ahead.
In light of the parking minimum, can we just loop back and maybe get confirmation on the street frontage improvements? So what is proposed code saying about street frontage improvements with density on the units? And now that we have less parking, do we want to talk about improvements on that and sidewalks?
So we can verify in terms of when street front, are you basically asking me what triggers street frontage improvements in terms of the number of units? Okay.
Commissioner Dorian?
Just a point of clarification. I think there is a change since last time on page 163. Line 6, that section H, because that was a question that I posed to Kimberly Horn and they said it would have to be changed. So I think it was changed since last time.
Yeah.
You have a question about it, Commissioner Dorian?
No, just wanted to make sure that the commission was aware of that because it does change our ADU code. So
Okay.
it goes to that.
All right. Any other comments or questions on that point? We are on page 163, line 6. Line 6, yes. Would you like to say something to it, Vice Chair Thompson? No? Okay.
I have a question, but not on that line.
Anybody else on that line? Okay, go ahead, Commissioner Olson.
This is just a question for Kimberly Horn. It's line 17 through 19 around accessory dwelling units. My understanding from that, and I think this is what it's trying to convey, but I just want to be sure that this is the case, is that accessory dwelling units sold individually from the principal unit are condominium units, right? So they don't own the land. We aren't splitting the parcels because that's when we get into the hairy situation of what's the difference between that and a single family house. I think that's what it's trying to say, but I just want to confirm that.
I will note that down as a question.
I think we need to, yeah. I was still focused on sorry, I was going back to Commissioner Dorian because I found the note in the memo. So this was number 12 in Kimberly Horn's memo. And it says, provide clarification on the occupancy definition for ADUs. It says currently KMC 1873 108. I think that's that. States that the total number of occupants in the principal dwelling unit and accessory dwelling unit combined shall not exceed the maximum number of established for a single family dwelling as defined in KMC 1820.1010, as ADUs may be owned separately, RCW such and such. This must be revised to clarify that separate families as defined in the Kenmore Code under 1820.1010 may occupy as a primary unit and an accompanying ADU. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that was that one.
It does. I went on a
Yeah.
fun little rabbit hole and looked at the link there, and it doesn't actually give a maximum number for a single family. So, but yeah, I mean, that I guess what I was looking at, the reason I asked the question is thinking it like, how do we bound what an ADU is? And then once they do become condominiums, what rules are they governed by? Like, I think that's the interesting thing is that this suggested there might be a number of people rule, but it seems like there's not that rule. It looks like it's really just the square footage and then anything else that remains. And then whether that then becomes a small house on a small lot, which would have different code regulating it. I think that would be my question is it doesn't become a single family home just because it's been condoized, because it's existing on a child lot. So there must be some different regulations for it once it's sold separately.
5 more minutes, Madam Chair.
Any objections to extending our meeting 5 more minutes to 10:25? Seeing none, we'll do that.
I just wanted to voice that that's effectively the question I have as well on that line 17 through 19. My understanding is this, the main difference is it isn't a separate lot. It's part of the parent lot for an ADU. And so you're part of an HOA with this setup, and that might not be functionally that different from a small house on a small lot, except it prevents potentially the splitting of the lot into a smaller lot and then building additional housing or additional units that way. And that's the clarification I'm looking for.
Okay. Any other questions on that page?
Madam
Bless.
Chair,
Yes, Vice
I
Chair
move
Thompson.
that the missing middle housing rules and regs be prepared as amended for public hearing at our next meeting.
Well, we're going to have one more meeting before the public hearing.
Oh, well, I
yeah.
was just,
We're not ready, well,
Yeah.
given the discussion tonight, which has been great but long, we're going to come back at the April 1st meeting with affordable housing language, and we're going to address the questions that you've asked regarding this current draft, so that it's going to be in question form mostly, and there are still, I think, the outstanding questions which could then lead to further code amendment are likely going to be around height and parking.
Yes.
I withdraw my motion.
All right. So one last call for questions and comments.
Move, that
Well,
which one?
No, so I just want to know if anybody has any more questions or comments on the code, and I'm seeing none. So Debbie and Todd, just so that we are all clear about what our agenda is for next time, we should come prepared to.
So next meeting is, as I mentioned before, it's really the final meeting that you have for any discussion in order for us to move forward to a hearing now scheduled for April 15th or whatever date that is. I'm sorry, it's late. The next meeting in April, so that you can then, we need to schedule the recommendation at the council, and then they have so many meetings to discuss before the June deadline.
Okay,
Yeah.
so our task in at our next meeting, which is April 1st, will be to be able to make a recommendation that the element goes to public hearing on
hearing,
April
correct.
15th. So
And we will
we weren't able
have,
to do it today, but we will need to do it on April 1st.
and we will have the consultants here next week rather than the hearing, so that we can get every question ironed out before the hearing dates, because so that the hearing can then just be essentially listening to the public, and then you make your recommendation. So hopefully that makes sense.
And you can make changes
Sure.
following the hearing.
Yep.
If it's kind of making it less. If you start adding a whole bunch of new stuff, it will trigger the need for another hearing. So that's why I'm saying if there's anything that you even think you might want to have the public consider at hearing, it's important to have it be part of the code. You can take things, it's easier to take things out than put things in, or you're then needing another public hearing.
Commissioner Dorian?
I'll quickly ask one thing then. I think when we had original discussions, we wanted to look at options to discourage slot home development. I'm wondering if that could be something that would be a neighborhood benefit that could be explored.
Commissioner Olson?
I've got a couple things that I would like to bring up for discussion and potentially addition in the next meeting, but I just want to bring them up now so people are aware of them. I believe this was in our comment from previous meeting. One is establishing a pre-approved DADU plan program, working with my building permit and looking at other DADUs that have been approved in other my building permit cities. I would like to see that added. It seems like a common sense approach to streamlining construction and lowering construction costs, especially for first time, for small development and homeowners. And then the other thing that I'm interested in seeing is considering or allowing the number of DADUs to be constructed to meet the maximum density on the lot, not necessarily limiting it per lot. So if you have a house or if you have a lot with multiple houses, allowing multiple DADUs to be built without requiring a conditional use permit, as opposed to subdividing the lot per each house. I could see a number of instances where that doesn't work. I believe this is on page 111, and I missed it when we went through here. So it's page 111, lines 10 through 13. It would just be amending that line. And I'll bring this as a formal motion next time. So that more than one single detached dwelling unit may be allowed on an individual lot. Or per single family house or per house, per parent house, something along those lines. So it'd still be limited by the number of single family houses it's associated with per HB 1110, but not necessarily requiring subdivision of those lots, since it would just be effectively conduization. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Vice Chair Thompson?
So if we go down that road with ADUs, then we've got a lot of other ADU types of policies that are spread out in other parts of the code. And my concern is some of those were written in the concept of having one ADU per home versus more than one, which if they were allowed to do the things that they could do with one, it could really devastate neighborhood. It could be a little hotel, motel. It'd be a motel. That's what
To be clear, I am still saying it's one DADU per single family house. It's not more than that. I'm just saying if you've got multiple single family houses on one lot, why are we saying they can only have one DADU? That's it.
Okay, So this is not something that anybody is agreeing to. This is something that Commissioner Olson is asking us to talk about next time.
Yes.
Commissioner Vanderlyn.
Yes, just want to make sure we close the loop on the in lieu of and the process for handling the funds. Need to have maybe a consult with the city attorney. An option here to create some sort of city fund to hold those.
We
This is
already have
something
a
we put
city
into
fund.
code. Pardon me?
We have a city fund. We have an affordable housing fund set up.
And my question would be, could we have some description of that fund? What are the rules, or what are the dispersing those funds?
So, I don't know. I know we have a fund, but I don't know if there are any
I
rules
just want to
around
make
it.
sure this doesn't end up in a general fund or it ends up with a large discretion. We want to have specific rules and guardrails around this fund to make sure that it's used for a specific purpose. And then we have either an option of doing that within a city fund, or we could also designate within code that be donated or handed over to management by Arch. But I think we need to be specific about that.
Great. Thank you all so much, my fellow commissioners, for sticking with this really important conversation. We got a lot of good work done tonight. Thank you so much to staff for staying past 10 o'clock. We appreciate you so much. Could not do it without you. And with nothing more to come before us, this meeting is adjourned.